When the web was stood up, all we could think of was to implement the business model of television and radio. And so we immediately went to advertising, and that skewed the business model of the web quite significantly. So it ended up being about getting eyeballs, and essentially evolved to addicting people to certain kinds of platforms in the web ecosystem. Decentralized protocol technology enables us to move value to the internet and to build these trustworthy collaboration platforms so that people can participate, small companies can participate with full economic agency and full political agency, because these tokens that we're all issuing and firing around, many of them represent somewhere between cryptocurrencies and shares in a company, and many of them have governance rights, and the ability for people to step in and democratize the financial infrastructure for the planet, or democratize the government infrastructure potentially. I know some people think we live in democracies, but we can do a lot better.
I want to sort of bring those two stories together and talk about the fundamental role that cryptography plays in our modern day internet, and the fundamental role that the Linux kernel plays in our modern day internet. And perhaps more importantly, the fact that neither of those projects were closed source. Like, you weren't necessarily asking, how do I monetize this? You were creating something for the world to use. So I'd like to, just an open question to you all. How do you sort of shepherd that technology? Once it is out there in the wild, what roles do you play to help ensure that it stays open, stays available to businesses and individuals around the world?
I'm a lawyer. EFF works in law and policy. Our job is to help the creators, remove the obstacles to ongoing development and creation. And right now, encryption is under really serious threat. It's under threat internationally, and it's under threat in the United States. And so, especially for the folks here, I know there's a lot of blockchain folks in this audience. There is a fight going on in Congress where your voice is really needed. Because I think they think encryption is just something that bad guys use to, plan heists, and they don't realize the deep reliance that all of us have on the kind of security and reliability that encryption gives. So, our job is to get the obstacles out of the way for entrepreneurs. And, there are others as well. If we're going to talk more broadly about the distributed web and not just about encryption, there's a set of laws that are getting in people's ways right now. And I'd love to talk about those a little later. And probably some positive things we need to do to try to free things up, because we've become so worshiping of this platform model that we're really locking out the ways that you continue to innovate in this world. But, for us on the encryption side, the science, because encryption is just math, right? It's applied math. So you can't remove it from people's brains, right? So the bottom part of encryption, the very end of is kind of applied math. It's not all that hard. So the idea that you could, erase people's brains and they wouldn't know about encryption anymore just, makes people giggle. Me too. But what we need to do is we need to get all the other obstacles out of the way of people actually using it.
I think the important thing for our organization is, whether it's Linux or Kubernetes, which is now the foundation of cloud computing, or Node.js, which is the world's largest server-side JavaScript, I guess, what people use to create modern web applications and mobile device applications. We want to enable what we think is in human nature, which is empathy, selflessness, cooperation. And I think too often, and Yochai Benkler in his book, The Penguin and the Leviathan, points this out so well. Too often we resort to what we know: selfishness, capitalism, punishment, money as a reward, and humans, and what we witness, and I'm fortunate to witness every day, they really want to work together. We ask developers all the time, why do you participate? I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of developers that build the infrastructure for the internet. Why do you participate? Money is never the top of this list. Cooperation, mastering their craft, the joy of creation. Humans want to do this. We've been fortunate to set up systems so that we can do that on every layer of the important software that runs the internet. That has worked in a way that has enabled it financially, and we want to continue to do that. But I think staying out of the way, making sure that we set up systems so that that continues is certainly something we take seriously.
Can you disrupt the big four the big four tech giants and still make money doing it?
Yeah, I mean, again, as an optimist, and I think you have to be in the job I have, I think people are inherently innovative. And if we can set up systems where we can build things that allow people to be social and cooperate, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can make money and work cooperatively and be open at the same time. And, I'm just a firsthand witness to this. Our organization, in every project that we've been hosting, sees billions of dollars in market cap made through startups that base a new company on an interesting new open source project. We see this software being used in amazing, innovative ways, and insurgent companies that come in. I think one of the things that has sort of caused consolidation in the tech sector is when we move to a services economy, CapEx and OpEx became a differentiator. When you have a collective $100 billion in CapEx being invested into cloud services, that's something that a startup can't compete with. I'm confident that people using open source can focus on that small part of innovation that will allow them to make money and give them the joy of cooperating on the software that they use with everybody else.
When you build using traditional IT, you're nearly always building some kind of Rube Goldberg machine. There are all these different components that you have to combine. You've got your cloud service, maybe you've got Kubernetes, you've got databases, web servers, firewalls, middleware. It's extraordinarily complex. And not only is the assembly of components complex and unreliable and insecure, but you're probably engaging with a vast number of different vendors, all of whom want to make you a captive customer. Our proposition is that you abandon all of that and that you build using smart contracts on the internet computer. And actually, smart contracts make things much simpler. It's true that nascent early blockchain technology has been complex to use, but smart contracts are inherently simpler to use because, for example, they can directly interoperate with each other. They're unstoppable. They're secure by default. And we see a future in which people just write code and push it to the internet to create enterprise systems and internet services and things like DeFi. And it's just much simpler. So one of the great advantages actually of the internet computer, you can list them. Yeah, sure, you're building on a public compute platform. You're building on the internet, essentially, by writing code to cyberspace. It's secure by default. You don't need firewalls to protect it or anything like that. It's unstoppable. But also, it greatly simplifies the construction of systems and services. And actually, if you look at the costs in IT, the costs really relate to complexity. And for example, if you take a Fortune 500 company, 85% of their IT costs will be IT operations. And you break down those IT operations costs, and 90% plus relate to completely unnecessary complexity. So, one of the most important things we can do is provide people with a much simpler way of building. And that's what the internet computer does. And when you build, you also get a lot of things for free. You're getting a system or service that's secure by default. You're getting a system or service that's unstoppable. And, in a kind of interesting twist, the internet computer reimagines smart contracts as a scaling platform. We aim to make it easier to scale.
One other sort of tangent of that I wanted to ask about is also just the sort of the relationship that's been created from the current incarnation of the internet between these major technology companies, the Googles, Amazons, Facebooks, Apples of the world, and the people, where many individuals around the world feel that there's a disproportionate amount of value accruing to these large companies that have put up walled gardens around their data networks, and they're not necessarily doing good as sometimes they purport to do. And on top of that, sometimes it's even more disproportionate when we talk about more emerging economies that have less choice than individuals in the United States and Canada and the European Union. What are your thoughts on that? Brad, perhaps starting with you first.
It is a challenging question. Now, I think the companies are very different. For example, I'm more afraid of what Facebook has become than what Google has become. And Google is a company that, as huge as it is and as valuable as it is, and by the way, I often refer to Archie as the grandfather of Google when I talk about other things. So that's a good place to be. But they've also done some pretty remarkable things. I mean, they decided not to collaborate with the censorship of China, which Microsoft and other companies have all agreed to do. So they certainly have their ups and downs. Facebook was, of course, created to find interesting things to do with your data, and that gives it, unfortunately, the motives. One of the things I actually regret the most about what Google did to the world was that we only really found advertising as a way to monetize activity on the internet. I mean, it's not exclusive. There are some paid systems, and of course, Forbes now has a paywall too, but most of the vast majority of it is paid for only by advertising, because that was the easiest and least friction flow that allowed people to just use it without having to think too much about it and not pay for subscriptions. And that has unfortunately perverted what's gone on as well. It's of course driven the internet to be responsive to the wishes of advertisers than more to the wishes of users. Now, I have actually worked a little bit at Google on the self-driving car, and I've known the company since before it was founded. I've known the founders of it since before they started it. And I actually think that while I certainly don't agree with all the things they do, they usually have their hearts in the right place about this sort of stuff. But this is one thing that's distorted everyone, because where your money comes from is going to control what you do. It's hard for private entities to solve that problem. I mean, one of the great ironies is that Google inside was a super open company at the beginning. And after search engine optimization came around, they said, oh, we've got to hide how our algorithms work, because the SEO people are going to basically try and cheat them and move up and game them. And so that created a different culture that was a little more secret, at least around that. They still try and keep an open culture the rest of the place. So they don't even know exactly how to deal with some of the problems that we're being asked about. Thinking that the regulators or that a public utility regulation commission could figure out is pretty challenging. And I certainly look at what's happened with Facebook recently, when everyone's been saying, Facebook, you've got to censor yourself. You got to start shutting down the hate groups. You got to shut down Donald Trump, the alt-right groups. And after begging for that, I've seen nothing but complaints from people on Facebook about, oh, Facebook banned me for posting something fairly ordinary and censored me. When you ask for other people to take control, you usually don't like what you get.